Hello, I am Maltese and I founded this project called Uncommon, and as we've heard so many stories tonight, I'll tell you the story about how this book came about. I was sitting on the 22nd floor of the Porto Malta Tower, which rises up from the urban St. Julian's area, which is very densely populated. There's nightclubs and restaurants and bars and hotels and apartment blocks like Broken Teeth, and it's all the way up on the 22nd floor, and from there you can look out and see the whole of Malta. And there was this great party going on. There was a Canadian, Norwegian rock and roll themed engagement party, and I have to say I wasn't really in the mood, and I found myself sitting at the edge of the club looking out onto the cars winding along very slowly, and I thought, wow, I've never seen Malta like this. I've never really looked at Malta and observed it from up here. And there was a friend of mine there that night, a Norwegian lawyer called Thomas Jacobsen, and I guess he was in the same mood because we got to talking. We got to sort of turn our backs on what was going on and look out of the window, and we started to talk about a Malta that we loved, a Malta with decaying charm, a Malta with mature citrus gardens, with this abundance of like terraced fields in the winter that were green, and something far away from this kind of busy, urban, progressive space where we found ourselves. And we talked about the things that we love to do in Malta, swimming in the clean sea, and rather than a swimming pool, for example, on a hot summer's day. And we concluded that there's sort of these two conflicting perspectives about Malta. There's the desire to develop Malta and to prosper at all costs. And on the other hand, there's this need to preserve and to conserve the eccentricity and the inefficiency and the chaos that make Malta so unique. And we asked ourselves, where do we stand on this? What do we as a nation want for our future? And what is the price that we will pay for our aspirations and our desires? In a country that relies heavily on tourism, did we really understand what it was that made us so special and so unique? And how could we move forward as a nation and prosper without losing the beauty of the many layers that make up our culture and identity, which you've heard about in great detail this evening? And could we possibly reconcile these two conflicting views? Big questions for a rock and roll party. So I suggested to Thomas that I'd been thinking about doing a book about it for a while, and maybe he'd had a few whiskies, but he just said, let's do it. And he's a man of few words, so when he said, let's do it, I took his word for it. And I woke up the next day with a sore head, and I mulled over these questions, and I got to the main dichotomy, which is evidently the result of our local history. As an island nation, we are young, and we often, as often happens with places like this, you have to find your identity, and when you've been colonized for centuries, there's an understanding that you have to leave it behind and to evolve and develop in an autonomous and dynamic way, and obviously to create a thriving economy and to create a present. But there's also a wish, as I said, to preserve the past and to claim it as our own. So straddled between the past and the future, I realized that we needed to look at our present, and I needed to celebrate it. So I contacted a British artist who lives in Malta called John Banthorpe, and together we embarked on creating this book, which in the spirit of Guy Debord's Derive would meander and get lost in a way in the small stories of Malta that somehow together would make up a kind of understanding, a closer understanding of what it means to be Maltese today. So the cover of the book is taken in a place called Gżira, which is just beyond the very urban neighborhood of Slima. And obviously it features water because Malta is all about the sea. It's the thing that releases you, and it's the thing that traps you. And John took this photograph one day, and we used it, apparently without permission, from the young girl on the cover of the book. We later found out that. But it didn't matter. We were just so happy that there was this fantastic photograph that tells a story of Malta. The story of Malta is that everything overlaps. This is a horse cooling off, possibly at the end of the day after being at the racetracks in Marsa. And I think the book did turn out to sort of do the job, which is to bring the smaller stories to the fore. So this is a piece by a German artist called Bettina Hutschek. For this, she crawled around on the floor of St. John's Cathedral, and she discovered all these wonderful creatures. She found putti and pygmies and swords swallowing snakes, and we sort of enter into the realm of Borges here. And I think I'll read a little quote from what she says about the work. She says, "It is as if all those skulls and bones had brought along another world, a magical, timeless world of fantastical creatures for us to look at, not as a reminder of death and decay, but as a reminder of life." And so here we've entered the realm of looking at a cathedral which is visited time and time again for the Caravaggio, but being asked to sort of look at the floor. And so we enter into the spirit of Uncommon. The next piece I'd like to highlight is a very long and convoluted article by a journalist called Rafael Vassallo, whose father also wrote about Byron in the book. And Rafael grew up in this area called Slima, perhaps the area that's seen the most recent change in Malta. And he has created a guide to the invisible attractions, i.e. he takes us to places that no longer exist. In the top left-hand corner you can see the Magic Kiosk, which was a go-to place in the 80s if you were in one political party, and a place to boycott if you were not. And he takes us through this very difficult story, I think, of recent politics and how that has come to define us or not. And I think, this is what's called the ferries. So the ferries was a place where you would take the boat to Valletta and back, or to various other, I think, but around Valletta and to the other cities. But now there is the ferry service has been reintroduced, and you can see that there used to be a cinema there, and now there's a Zara, and so on and so forth. So that was the way to sort of introduce the reader to a difficult story told from the perspective of a child growing up in that area in the 80s, obviously with the hindsight and the intelligence of Rafael and his obsessive need to dig up all the stories. He did a great job. So from that I move on to a rubbing done by a Maltese artist called Chris Bianchi. He did this at the base of the Salib Talolia, or the La Ferla Cross as it is known, which is a cross that was erected in 1903 on the highest point in Malta, and it's a place of pilgrimage. And I wanted to deal with religion, which, as we know, is a very central theme in our identity, but I didn't really want to get into the ins and outs of what religion does or doesn't do for our progress. So Chris was really smart about it, and he just went and did these beautiful rubbings of the graffiti left behind by all the people who've come this way as part of the Via Crucis, I believe. Nicholas De Piro. Nicholas De Piro is a very interesting local character. He's an art historian, he's a poet, he's a collector, he has a wonderful home that you can visit, and in Valletta, where he lives, and if you're lucky you run into him and have a cup of tea with him. And he was very interested in bringing attention to architectural follies, recent buildings from the 18th century on that perhaps are endangered in that they happen less frequently because of the way in which modern or contemporary architecture evolves. So the building on the left is a house in Imdina, and it's right there on the main square. And I believe some purists find it vulgar, or did in the day. But anyway, it's still there. And this is the fountain at Villa Bologna, which is in Attard, where the Trafford family live. And you can also visit this lovely villa and its gardens. That's a building by Caruana Galizia. He's a very interesting architect. He also designed the cemetery that I think we have a picture of. And that there is the casino. Also, I think the... sorry, my memory is a bit... might have been a station between Imdina and Valletta. So Imdina and Valletta had a train that ran connecting the old city to the new, and this was the place, I believe, where you maybe not. Anyway, so he says it's a club, a station club, where the nobilties hang out and probably threw coins at the less privileged. At Caruana Galizia again, a lovely detail from the Turkish-themed cemetery, and then again, finally, the Gothic cemetery, which is the main cemetery in Malta, the Addolorata cemetery, and very much in use. And quite, I think, a tangent from the Baroque or the more structured square architecture found in Malta today. Imdina, as many of you know, is the old capital of the city of Malta, and it's sometimes portrayed as a rather fusty place. So I got a young architect called James Manduka, who grew up there, to share the delights of childhood in Imdina, where you can roam free and hide in the nooks and the crannies and the labyrinths there. And his silent city is a boisterous one and a noisy one. It's one with fireworks, and also we dealt with the festa. The festa is a bit of a hackneyed idea, so it was quite nice for him to talk about the festa in Imdina. So from Imdina, we traveled down to Hamrun. This is a piece called Don't, in brackets, Go to Hamrun, and it's by an Anglo-Maltese artist called Sandra Zaffarese. And here she just, she explored the kind of hybrid and I think quirky details of a town that perhaps no longer functions the way it did, but still somehow has a character all of its own. So love it or hate it, I say, visit Hamrun. And noise, well, we love noise. We shout on the phone, we shout, we talk over each other, and we love noise. Noisy cars, we like a double exhaust, we like to skid, we like to be heard, and we like to, I don't know, assert ourselves. And these are photographs from the drag racing that takes place on a disused Second World War runway. So there you go, but effects of colonialism and how we adapt, adopt, and perhaps improve. And this is a kind of a really interesting place to go and just hang out and kind of enjoy the noise and the ridiculousness of it all. The eccentricity, the chaos. Santa Man United. This is an illustration by Harry Malt, who's English but loves Malta, and it's his take on what happens when you have, I think he says, colonial withdrawal and the waning of religious life. And Malta, as some of you might know, has a massive football support club for the Manchester United. They've been there since the 50s, and we're very proud of our ability to support this team. And what do we eat? Hopsbezait. And if you go to Malta, you have to have hopsbezait. It's always best after a really early morning swim. And here we have a list of some of the best bars where you can get a good bit of hopsbezait, which is bread with oil and capers and tomatoes and crusty Maltese bread. The films that have been shot in Malta: Agora, Gladiator, Troy, Count of Monte Cristo, Munich. And of course, Malta being a small place, everyone knows someone who had a drink with Oliver Reed or had a dance with Russell Crowe, or And so this is good. This is part of our current folklore, and it's always fun to talk about the movies that have been made in Malta. This is a sort of wink at the conventional guide on what you're supposed to see, which is actually very difficult to see. We don't really want to go there. We don't really want to talk about what you're supposed to see. We wanted to allow you to find out path all of your own. And finally, as a last detour, is Gozo, a mystical island where we go to unwind and relax and to swim in the lovely. This is one of our favorite beaches, our Aula, where you have to jump off that rock as a rite of passage. But perhaps best of all is floating in the water at Ramla, the bay where Calypso allegedly seduced Ulysses into staying for 7 years. And if you were to go there and lie down on the beach at sunset, you'd understand why. That's it.